Yes, my lady. Good morning.
Morning, my lady. Dr. Loftus, you had a chance now to look at what was given to you yesterday on one page. And as I said yesterday, I only got hold of the first reference, Spitz and Fisher, medical legal investigation of death. You've placed it, the extracts now in context.
Yes, my lady, I've done so.
Well, lady, I'm not going to hand them in this one page, but I have made an extract from 4 pages out of this book, and I wish to hand that in as an exhibit. I believe it would be H. 4 pages. Well, and then the cover page of copy of the book. Dr. Loftus, I'm using this book as a reference for the principle on the possibility that the skin can have creases or crinkles caused in the process of the autopsy, putting the neck in a backwards position. In principle, would you agree with that?
It may cause very temporary creases, my lady, but it's definitely not going to, when the head is forced back out of that position, it will disappear. There are certain situations where one has to be aware of, and that's when you are dealing with an obese patient or person, and also with babies. Now, the first 2 pages of this
it's about babies, yes.
is about child abuse, page 400 and 401. And babies typically has got quite a thick adipose layer in their necks and so forth. So part of that is because they not only contain the normal fat that we as adults have, but they also call what we call brown fat, which is a fat that differs from the normal fat because it can easily produce energy. So in that case, and this is now represented, the figure, my lady, which is in the text, is that of Roman 13:33, and that figure then is on page 401, and I've looked at the figure in the textbook, so it's better than the one in the photostat. And there,
sorry, Dr. Loftus, may I hand up the book because that photo is not properly. Yeah.
Dr. Loftus, you had cited the book.
yes, my lady, I did.
And Mr. Vice.
As the court pleases.
Thank you.
It's Roman 8, alluded to by my learned friend. Yes, this.
My lady, the court will note that on the top is standing investigations of deaths in childhood, page 401. So we're dealing now with a specific group of deaths from a forensic perspective. And in babies, having this fatty, obese layer, obviously when the body is cooled during the mortuary process, the fat will congeal, I'm not going to say coagulate, but it will become very hard and firm. That's just because, as we all know, we have prepared food, that fat, if it gets cold, it is much firmer than when it is at room temperature. So this then, because the fat is now of a firmer consistency, that if you then have movement, then those creases can look like a hanging mark. But in fact, it's just because it's almost like working with clay, an impression left. Now, if you want to remove that, to make sure it's not a wrinkle, then what you'll do is you'll just heat up the neck region, and it will then disappear as the fatty tissue return to their normal position. So that can also happen in obese persons, that you can have this, I'm going to call it in inverted commas, ligature mark, but that's an artifact. So that's the first thing. And I also just want to remind the court that I've mentioned a couple of previous times about the death shroud, which can also, if it is too tight around the neck, can leave this imprint, and you have to be aware of those artifacts. So, beginning here with the child, and I don't have any issue with this. This is how we do find when babies die, and the neck is maybe inflection and so forth, that when you then look at the body in the mortuary, you may think there's a ligature mark. It's not so. It's a normal skin crease that will disappear.
Thank you. Age also plays a role in the skin, isn't that so? Age of the person.
Yeah, my lady, we all know that as we get older, our skin gets thinner, and I think that is what I also mentioned, that the skin the changes in the age-related changes in the skin will vary from area to area. That's why we do get wrinkles on the face and the neck and on the hands, and not necessarily on the back, where there's a different type of skin.
If we go to page 400 of this extract, the left column, the last paragraph in the middle, other artifacts that may be mistaken, I'm quoting, for abuse include creases in the skin, the neck, simulating a ligature mark, facing mottling, or lividity, thought to be ante-mortem bruises. Would you agree that these lines could also be lividity?
These lines?
The neck that we see there?
No, my lady, the line on the back has got a relatively pale area in the middle, which would be the ligature mark, and then it's got a slight red appearance on both sides, almost like a tram line. Now, those are not lividity or a vital reaction. Those are, in fact, the blood being pushed towards the side due to the pressure of the ligature on the adjacent tissue. So it's almost like a tram line, because you've now got force in the middle exerted by the ligature. The blood in the vessels are forced into the surrounding vessels. So the surrounding vessels look more red. The blood is still inside, so it's not a bruise or a contusion or whatever you want to call it. It is just redness, hyperemia due to increased blood in the small vessels. And that is what you can see on those photographs. A small, thin line. It's not a vital reaction. It's just a displacement of blood.
The state has already placed on record that we don't accept that explanation of yours based on the evidence from Dr. Khan and Dr. Abrams. Be that as it may, what I find difficult, and we had it already discussion about this in court, is that those lines does not appear parallel. Would you agree with that?
My lady, for me, I won't say it's 100% parallel, but it's quite close to being parallel. And you must remember that because of the contour of the neck and the skin, you're not looking at drawing a straight line with a ruler on the neck. So when we say parallel, I mean, we imply that you've got two lines running next to one another. It may be sometimes coming a bit closer, moving away, and so forth, but the general concept is that of two parallel lines. And we as forensic pathologists we often see tramline injuries. I mean, when you hit someone with a cane or whatever, the mechanism is that you will see so-called tramline hemorrhages, and we use that often to bring it to correlate with the possible weapon that it was dealt with. Weapon, if you know, whether it was with a whip, because with a whip you will see different, you will in fact with a whip you almost see the same type of marks that you will see hanging, because there's lateral movement of the whip onto the skin, while with a cane you will see typical tramline images. So you say you would rather state those lines are parallel? Yeah, in our definition of parallel, they are parallel. My lady, may I just, because I thought we were going to, I know that the issue of the neck block is something for the court. Now, I just want to, and I've touched on it in my evidence in chief, if I remember correctly. But I just want to point out to the court that there was a post-mortem period of 50 hours between death and the autopsy. That is how I put it. Now, in 50 hours, I would expect, and all the authorities that I've got here, we usually say after 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours, you will start to have hemolysis of the blood, the breaking down of the blood. So you will that is when the lividity will get fixed. So it won't move away. And it also won't blanch if there's pressure on the skin, because it's now, what it says, fixed. The pigment has leached out into the surrounding tissue and no pressure can move it. So, 50 hours later, after death, if you put something below the body, it's really highly unlikely that you're going to disturb that lividity. With disturb, I mean that you're going to now create a pale area, and I do believe that center looks a bit more pale than the surrounding tissue, and you're going to displace that tissue or the blood having those two red lines. So that's another reason why I am quite comfortable from a scientific and objective point of view to state to the court, it's my opinion that that is an ante-mortem mark and not caused post-mortem by a block or other object.
The state differs on that. I've got no further questions.
Thank you, my lady. Dr. Loftus, the first extract that was handed up with the 3 articles that has not been made an exhibit. You know the one I'm referring to?
Yes, my lady, I believe this is this
yes.
one.
Have you had access to the other 2 authorities that were mentioned here or not?
No, my lady, unfortunately I don't have access to these 2, I don't have these 2 textbooks available to me, and so I can't comment on them.
If we look then just at the first extract, is there anything there to indicate that that came from a chapter that was devoted to injuries to children?
The first reference, the one that we have just dealt with, page 400 and 401, those are from the chapter on medical legal investigation of death, and then specifically investigation of deaths in childhood.
Yes, but I want to hand this extract that was handed up by my friend yesterday. I want to hand this up as an exhibit. I think it will be double I, my lady. Is there anything in that extract indicating the way it's been cut and pasted that it related to children, that chapter?
Oh no, my lady, if I wouldn't have been aware that this is from children.
Without looking at the whole chapter and the diagram?
And the diagram.
And the figure?
Yeah, the figure would have assisted me.
You mentioned that the figure was, I think you said 13, but it was actually figure 8.
No, my lady. No, that is figure 13. It is an X, 10 and 3.
Oh, 13 there.
Yeah. 13, then 33. So Roman 13.
Yes, but that's is that not a printing error?
Yes, indeed, my lady. If I look at the photo, that is 8. So somewhere they confused the
X and the V.
Yeah.
Because in the actual text, it also says X3-33, but the actual photograph on page 401 says figure V111, in other words, Roman 8.
Yeah, 5 less.
Okay. Now, there are just 2 other aspects that I want to canvass with you, if I may, Dr. Loftus. The learned court referred at one stage, when putting a question to you, to the learned court said something along the following lines: your opinion is of course based on scientific probabilities. And your answer was, I take into account all available information and so on and so forth. When analyzing the testimony of experts, sometimes our courts have referred to the importance of distinguishing between so-called scientific certainties and legal certainty. You probably, as a person who is a forensic pathologist, are aware of the fact that we speak about probabilities in law, not so.
Yes, my lady.
Now, what I need to know is, I want absolute clarity from you in this regard. When you are testifying or have testified in this matter, and you have said, for example, it is highly probable that this injury was an ante-mortem one, what do you mean when you say probable?
My lady, and maybe this will also assist the court. I know that Dr. Perrible, for instance, also touched on this. In medicine, the scientific part of the cause of death, we often use the word, or we always use consistent with. So if we feel comfortable to contribute something to a condition, we will say it is consistent with. I use it maybe 3-4 times a day in some of my reports. Now what has been put to me is about the legal aspect. How do we translate the scientific medical terminology when we try to give a cause or do give a cause with the legal one? Now when I say highly likely or most probable and those terms, for the legal definition, I then get into the phrase or the phrase which will say beyond all reasonable doubt. That is what I put it in that league, 95% more certainty. I'm not excluding, and my lady, it's important for me not to be seen as a hired gun or whatever people have been called. I'm here as an expert to assist the court, to try and be as objective as possible, to try and bring science and law together. That's why, the reason why I'm a forensic pathologist. So I will acknowledge that there's always a chance of 1% or 2% or whatever, it may be something else. But for me, as I'm standing here, I believe, as I've said before, that beyond reasonable doubt, the scenario that I've given to the court yesterday specifically, again, adding then that I now believe she died there where the body was on the floor. That is my opinion.
And you're expressing that view with the level of certainty that you would approach from a scientific point of view.
Yes, I'm now bringing the scientific point, using the scientific and objective findings that I've got available to me to formulate a legal opinion on the cause of death.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, you are saying that that opinion you express with a 95% or more certainty, degree of certainty.
Yes, my lady, that's...
Okay. Can you just assist us with one term that you use quite frequently, and I just want to make 100% sure that we all understand it. What do you mean when you use the word morphological?
My lady, morphologically is a term that we use in medicine. Morphos is what you see. So morphology of, let's say, an organ, you can have the macroscopic appearance, what I can see with the naked eye. That will be the macroscopic morphology. For instance, if we can use this case, the contusions on the lung, that those are morphological changes seen by the naked eye macroscopically. The next phase, lower phase, will be to go and see, okay, what can you see through the microscope? So both macroscopy and microscopy will evaluate the morphology of what you see, depending, obviously, the higher magnification, the more you can see. And then you can also then bring in electron microscopy, where you look at the ultrastructural level. That is now at the lowest level or at the highest level that you can go, where you can see all the different structures in the cell. So those are all morphology. So it depends. Can be with the naked eye? Can be through the microscope? Can be through the electron microscope?
So if I simplify matters for my sake, when I hear you using the word morphological changes, or the term, you mean changes that can be observed.
Exactly, my lady.
That can be visualized.
Seen with the naked eye or through a microscope.
Right. Now, you've expressed the opinion in this matter that the rib injuries, the sternum injury, I think also, but the bilateral rib injuries were probably occasioned in the CPR process, particular regard being had to the fact that CPR was attempted on the deceased by 2 lay people. When you say that, what do you mean when you say probably caused by CPR?
My lady, number one is that there is a history of CPR, as was put to me also now again, by 2 individuals. I'm also looking at the size of the deceased. He was of relatively slender build, so if a male person can exert quite a lot of force. So I'm looking at those 2 aspects, and also then I look at the post-mortem findings and the typical injuries described in CPR-related injuries. I know that there was an article, or even maybe 2 or 3, which was submitted by Dr. Perumal. So we know there are injuries. My lady, interesting, we often say that if you have resuscitated a person and you didn't break a rib, you did it vigorously enough. So it is so common that we expect it to see it. And those injuries, the pattern of them, is for me what I will call CPR-related injuries.
And the injuries to the lung, the contusion, and particularly at the margin of the lung that you referred to, can you just discuss that?
My lady, the soft tissue injuries, I've now commented on the bony fractures. If we go to the soft tissue injuries, especially on the right-hand side, those are what we call fracture-related hemorrhages. I'm talking on the rib cage now. And the reason is that just below the rib, each rib has got what we call the neurovascular bundle. So there's a little artery, a vein, and also a nerve. That's why it can be quite painful when you fracture your rib, because that nerve is in what we call the subcostal groove. So when you fracture the rib, you often damage the artery or the vein, and you get hemorrhage. So that will describe the hemorrhage surrounding the fracture. The other soft tissue injury which counsel has put to me is that of the lung and so forth. Now, as I've put in that slideshow of mine, I describe the contusions of the right middle lobe as fracture-related, meaning that that is deep to the fracture. I'm not saying that the bony ends of the fracture stick into the lung tissue. It's just because lots of pressure was on that area. That's why the ribs fractured. So it can be a fracture going into the rib, into the lung, causing hemorrhage, but it can also just be part of the whole fact that a lot of pressure was exerted there. And then as I've also indicated in my presentation, that there are certain areas in the thoracic cavity, in the chest cavity, where, by lack of better word, I'll say there are narrow areas, narrow passageways. For instance, where the diaphragm, the dome of the diaphragm, and then you get the diaphragm being attached to the chest cavity at that little angle, the costophrenic angle. The lung, because normally the lung will fit into all those spaces, it fills the whole chest cavity, can get pinched as pressure is exerted. So those are the other injuries, soft tissue injuries. So we've got bony injuries and soft tissue injuries, which is that of CPR-induced injuries.
Right. My last question to you. In a nutshell, in a sentence or two, what is your opinion regarding the death of the late Mrs. Rohde?
My lady, I believe that, and I'm saying it from the position of after taking everything into account, I believe that beyond reasonable doubt, the deceased on that morning hanged herself in the bathroom. She didn't die instantaneously. She was rescued, if I can call it, or taken off from the ligature mark, or from the ligature, and she was unsuccessfully resuscitated. In that period, taken off, or let's say, since the ligature exerted its face, until whenever she passed the urine, that was the process of dying.
Repeat that, sorry.
So, my lady, in that period that she was taken off, or not even taken off, since the ligature exerted its effect on the neck, when she hanged herself, until such time that the sphincters relaxed and everything, that is the process of dying. And unfortunately, she most probably, like in many of these cases, one can say that the CPR was unsuccessful because he was beyond the point of return in that process of dying, which is not an event. It may have been more than 2 sentences, but I think that's the best I can do.
Thank you. Thank you, my lady. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Dr. Loftus. Thank you. Would be excused for now. Please, Panika.
I'm not sure what.
Should I just excuse Dr. Loftus?
Yeah.
As a court pleases, ma'am.
Defense.
sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Who would you call next?
My lady, pardon me. I'm a little bit thrown out in terms of planning by the brevity of my learned friend's cross-examination of Dr. Loftus. I expected it to take at least 2 days, possibly more than 2 days. My next witness at the earliest is available tomorrow morning. I have discussed and mentioned this to my learned friend, and I might just mention that my next witness, as I stand here now, that I intend to call is Mr. Miller. I'm also involved in discussions with my learned friend with a view to presenting him with an affidavit for his acceptance, I hope, by my instructing attorney, so that I can avoid having actually to call my instructing attorney as a witness, But if that's not successful, then my next witness after that will be my instructing attorney,
Who's that?
Mr. Witz.
Okay. Well, so far we'll deal
So
with Miller tomorrow.
As the court pleases, if we may postpone until tomorrow, my lady.
Thank you. There would be no, this doesn't seem to be an objection by Mr. Panika.
No objection.
Thank you. We'll proceed tomorrow on the 8th of August. Dr. Loftus, thank you very much. You are excused. Mr. Rohde will proceed tomorrow. Bail is extended on the same conditions. Tomorrow's the 8th of August. Thank you. We'll proceed at 10. Thank you. Court's adjourned.
As the court pleases. Gail.